Good morning. My name is LZ Granderson. I'm an op-ed columnist with the Los Angeles Times. I'm very excited to be here. It's so nice to see faces, not on screens. Hope this is a reoccurring theme from now on. No more Zoom conferences. I don't mind Zoom work meetings, but Zoom conferences is a lot. To my left, I'd like to introduce someone who really doesn't need an introduction, of course. Everyone should know who this young lady is, especially here in Los Angeles. Katelyn Ohashi, NCAA national champion, and also the person most responsible for making gymnastics cool again. And to her left, we have Dr. Byron Young, community-oriented child, adolescent, and adult child psychologist for the LA County Department of Mental Health. Thank you both very much for joining us. We all know this conversation might be a little heavy because when you start talking about mental health, that's where people naturally grow. But I think it's important that we don't address this issue with a doom and gloom sort of perspective, but more of an optimistic perspective, because the more we know, the healthier we can all be for both ourselves as adults as well as our children. So I would like to start with looking at this moment that we're having right now, right? Particularly in sports, where you have Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles, Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, who will be here a little bit later. It seems as if a lot of high-powered celebrity stars, a lot of high-powered athletes are using their platform to talk about mental health. My question is, do you see this as a mental health renaissance or a mental health crisis? Let's start with Katelyn.
I think in the sports space, I think it's more of a renaissance because we're seeing some of the first cases that we've ever seen before, whereas some of these athletes, some really high profile athletes at really high competitions are saying, no, I'm putting my mental health first. And for the first time, I think people are like, what? You're not just entertainment for us. So I think it's really cool to see, but I do think it is a cry for help at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think kind of both and. I think it is a crisis in that things are stressful. Our exposure to things there's the blessing that comes with social media, and then there's kind of the curse of it, where you're constantly exposed to these kind of messages and images that can be really difficult. And so I think generationally we're seeing a lot more anxiety, depression, and that kind of thing. So you definitely have the kind of crisis of that. But I think the renaissance is that people are more open to talk about it. There's a lot of data that talks about Gen Z particularly having more of these emotional health issues, but also being more likely to get help and kind of reach out and that kind of thing. So I think it is kind of a both and, kind of a gift and a curse. And I think kind of supporting young people in kind of connecting with those resources is really powerful, but figuring out a way to kind of guard against the kind of negative inputs of some of the things that they're exposed to as well, I think is a big deal. But yeah, I think seeing folks I think sometimes being an athlete can be really dehumanizing, and that can be really stressful. And so people like Naomi are saying, hey, I am a full human being, I have feelings, I have emotions, and so speaking up in that way is really powerful. And so I think both and, for sure.
There was a huge debate, obviously, when Simone withdrew. Obviously, there's debate in coming to the French Open with Naomi Osaka. I spoke to a lot of professional athletes, both retired as well as active, and they're on different ends of the spectrum in terms of how they view this conversation. When you hear a phrase like winners make adjustments and losers make excuses, how does that play into the overall conversation when it comes to mental health?
I've had this conversation with some of my friends just about mental health and whether sports is a good thing or a bad thing. And I think that athletes are really well inept to change and able to adapt and kind of compartmentalize. I know going to a therapist, I learned that sometimes what I experience now isn't actually from something that just happened, it's something that happened from my past. And I wait until I can't hold anything in. But something that is really powerful about athletes is we're mentally strong and capable. So it's this interesting thing because I feel like as I was an elite gymnast, we weren't allowed to talk about anything. We weren't allowed to show emotions, and I think going to college and having a different aspect, and we were actually told to go see a therapist our whole freshman year. So it was kind of instilled in us to do that, and I think that helped me a lot because it realized that it was okay to not be okay and have these emotions and feelings and put myself first over the sport.
Yeah, I think it's like, well, winners make adjustments. Sure, that's true. And I think if you're going to battle mental health, regardless of who you are, it takes work, right? But I think this notion about it, the notion of excuses versus adjustments is difficult in that, like, you do have to be aware that something's going on. So that's not an excuse, but it is an awareness of like, whoa, something's happening, right? And so the notion of to make those adjustments, you do need to have a kind of a critical lens to be able to look at what's going on and kind of taking that in. And I think sometimes with athletes, the process of looking at what's going on looks like an excuse to the outside world, but no, they're just kind of taking an assessment of kind of the kind of work I need to do. And so, yeah, I do agree that winners need to make adjustments in that way, but from a humanizing lens, I think kind of being able to see these what we call excuses as like just an awareness that something's happening, I think is really important. Yeah.
Dr. Young, can you talk a little bit about what the data shows in terms of how the 2 years of COVID has impacted mental health in general, but particularly with young people?
For sure, yeah. So again, already we're seeing, particularly with Gen Z, higher rates of depression, rates of suicide, and those types of things are already going up. And so you have kind of an increase in those things that was already happening, and then you compound kind of the social isolation that came with the quarantine, the kind of fears of, you know, your parents' health. And so, yeah, it's kind of a big boom. I work particularly with kids in the foster care system, and so, yeah, we're seeing a huge influx of all kinds of things. So not only is it what you're experiencing yourself with your own, like a kid in the day of the life of a kid has changed, but the things that your parents are going through, those stressors are also affecting you as well. And so it is really, really heavy. And I think there's like an intersectional thing when you add race and you add, you know, sexual identity and those types of things. It's kind of becoming kind of a melting pot that really does a kind of a stew that's making it really difficult, right? And particularly, like, I think, you know, as a child psychiatrist, it's one of the most under-resourced fields in medicine. So it's like really kind of like not there's like lack of attention, lack of resources going into taking care of young people when it comes to their mental health. And so it is a struggle and definitely needs attention for sure.
Just as a quick follow-up, because we all know there are, you know, few school counselors in the nation's schools. However, we know that basically every school has multiple coaches. How can coaches be utilized to help bridge that gap between what a trained professional would normally do if the resources were there, while they still have so much of the kids' time and attention?
Yeah, I think a really good thing to do, there's an organization working on, have you ever heard of mental health first aid? It's like a big thing that they've done for adults, and so they're working on it for young people right now. And so I think if we could get all our coaches and all our folks who work with young people that mental health first aid training that kind of gives you kind of a savvy in terms of how to deal with folks when they're going through emotional struggles, kind of some of the things you might see are like, as opposed to saying like, oh, you'll be all right, this notion of like validating, like, oh, it looks like you're going through a hard time, and at the same time, can we get you to get some help? So there's something about that like validation that helps people not get so defensive and can kind of come and connect. And so those are just some of the things that mental health first aid teaches. But mental health first aid is something that's really becoming more available, and something I think that probably every coach, every teacher, every, you know, kind of all of us could benefit from. I know in New York City they were offering mental health first aid for all citizens, and I hope to see that happen here in LA as well. And it's cool that it's happening now for young people, so there's mental health first aid that young people can take so that they can help out their friends and their communities themselves. So I think that's probably would be a pretty impactful thing we could see.
Katelyn, I remember being a journalist early in my career and watching the coverage of Ricky Williams, the former NFL running back, and how he was trying to introduce a conversation about mental health in the way that we covered it as an industry. Spoiler alert, we didn't do too well. we were pretty bad at it. I would like to think we're a lot better today. My question to you as an athlete is, what are we still getting wrong, or what can we improve on as an industry in terms of how we talk about mental health in sports? Because we also are in a position to kind of set the tone nationally in terms of how sports fans talk about it.
Oof, okay.
Oh, you thought you were going to get easy questions?
I know, right? I feel like one of the problems is I feel like the people that watch sports they take it in like a dictating sense, so they dictate how we feel, whereas instead of getting it from the actual athlete firsthand, which sometimes you do, but you still put it into your own words. So it's really hard to understand an athlete when you don't know what it's like firsthand to compete and train. We're in the gym more than we are at home. So as athletes, it's so I don't know what Simone goes through. Even as a high-level athlete or gymnast, I don't know what it's like to perform in front of millions of people and be the biggest name going into the Olympics, and to hold that type of weight and to have that pressure at age 24. That's something that we don't know what it's like. So instead of trying to understand, because that's something that we probably can't understand, to just be there for someone and try to, you know, put that down as best as you can. But also kind of going back to the coaches, I feel like something too is, it's a lot of pressure on a coach because truthfully they can make or break an athlete's entire career. And something that UCLA has been doing is like transformative coaching. And I think it's really impactful because I've seen some of my really good friends completely lose it in college based upon their experience and their coaching experience. So I think it's really powerful, and you have to learn the power you hold as a human.
Can you explain a little bit more what exactly is transformative coaching?
I mean, obviously I think there's a different way of coaching, like even a couple years ago, that isn't acceptable nowadays. The things that you say, the things that you do, and the way that you punish athletes, I think is changing. So it's that transformative encouragement instead of, you know, something I've heard a coach say is you crush and crush and crush the athlete so that they compete out of fear, versus that encouragement and that building their confidence, which is so crazy. But I know I experienced the crushing someone to compete out of fear and feeling like if you're not winning, you're not anything.
How did you make your way through that?
Well, I got injured when I was 16, and I feel like it was really a blessing in disguise because I hated gymnastics at that time, or I thought I did. And so taking the 2 years off and finally being able to ask myself what I wanted out of gymnastics in my career kind of allowed me to dictate my future with it. And I remember going to therapy during that time, and I wasn't ready to receive any of the help. So I still hated gymnastics. I went to college and was taking out my anger on my coach, who's infamous, Miss Valerie Condos Field, and I remember her pushing a relationship between us so we could build communication between each other and trust. Trust is massive. So I was able to open up and allow that to kind of reflect in my gymnastics as well.
Can I say, I think just to add on that, one of the things we often talk about is the folks need mental health care, right? And I'm a big believer as a psychiatrist, everybody needs therapy. So we talk a lot about how, like, okay, let's get the players some therapy, let's get them some kind of mental health attention. But we don't talk about the folks who are like the stakeholders in their lives. Like if these coaches, like people talk about this kind of toxic coaching, those folks probably need some therapy too, right? So we should be making sure everybody kind of involved, everyone involved in the life of athletes needs to kind of be working on themselves. I think about as a psychiatrist, I definitely need to have a therapist if I'm going to be working with other people's mental health. And so I feel like the coaches, you know, focusing, like highlighting, getting support for the parents, everybody around this person needs to be working on themselves too if it's really going to work, because all those people really do matter in the kind of outcomes of this particular person. And so I think we all need that. And just a plug, if you guys look on your QR codes, we have some resources for folks to find things like therapists and that kind of thing. So please check the QR codes. There's like a mental health section. You can check out those resources.
It's been a minute since I've played ball in school and stuff, but I can just imagine trying to tell my coach, have you thought about going to see a psychiatrist? So how do you handle that conversation, recognizing the stigmas that are attached to that conversation?
I think maybe top down, right? So like the folks at the top should be making those decisions that like this is a requirement to be working with, like if you're running a school like UCLA, like the folks from the top down should be like, if you're gonna work with our athletes, our student athletes, these are the particular requirements. You need to be doing these particular types of work. And so I think coming from those folks, people are like, well, if you want this job, this is a part of the game. Like, so or maybe offering it for free, and also having programming where you're talking about, people are talking about the benefits of their therapeutic process. So what you're doing is phenomenal in that you're like talking about, oh, I go to therapy, it's a thing. And so having people kind of, that's one of the ways that you kind of remove that stigma. Oftentimes I think we think stigma is the only thing that gets in the way, but there's so many things that get in the way of it. So I think just having like open conversations around mental health, just more conversations will really kind of be one of the things that breaks down barriers, because there's lots of like misunderstandings and lots of kind of like, kind of stereotypes about things that I think just having open conversations around mental health more frequently and more consistently with more people would kind of be a great barrier to kind of remove.
You talked about barriers. We know still in this nation that communities of color tends to be the one that's struggling in terms of resources. How does systemic racism impact this conversation that we're having right now in terms of access to mental health professionals?
It's huge, actually. It's funny you asked that. One of my friends, Ruth Shimsh, who's a psychiatrist up at UC Davis, did a study. And so for under-resourced communities of color, the biggest factor that kind of prohibited folks from getting mental health wasn't even stigma, it was resources. It was either being underinsured or having kind of like lack of knowledge about insurance. And so oftentimes I think we want to use the stigma argument to push it on the community, but it's like there are systemic problems that need to change in order for that to kind of improve. So I think that's one of those things is that kind of thing. And I think again, like having these kinds of conversations around, like systemic racism is really, really dehumanizing. So it is a mental health burden in and of itself, not to mention just the mental health burdens that come with just being a human being. And so I think like kind of having conversations to kind of have folks think critically about who they are in spaces. Like if you're constantly giving me messages that I am less than, right, then I'm going to internalize that. And so I think we have to do more work at like creating spaces for kind of critical discourse for those communities to kind of make sure that the kind of beauty, the value in those communities is something that we're paying attention to. There's a great book written by Professor Christopher Emdin called For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too. And so it's for, yeah.
Wait. You need to do that again, slowly, so the folks in the back get all of it.
So the book is called For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too. And I say that book because there's lots of times where you have these kind of white teachers who are coming into kind of predominantly black spaces with this kind of salvation complex of like, oh, let me like save these lowly black children, not seeing the
like Dangerous Mind.
Yeah, exactly. But there is so much value and beauty and brilliance in these communities, and so if you're going to kind of come and interact with the community, you need to have a kind of appreciation for the humanity of that community, for the brilliance that already exists in that community, and so we have to expand our notions of what it looks like to be brilliant, to be beautiful. So it doesn't necessarily look like if you read the Times or if you wear your pants a particular way, like there's beauty and brilliance in all that. And so I think a lot of the work has to do with like coming in connected with communities, community education, but also has to do with the education of the people who are trying to come in and work with those communities. I think that's where we kind of forget, like you have to kind of shift your lens to kind of appreciate the humanity. And a lot of people can't even admit that like something like systemic racism is real. So if you can't admit that, then how are you going to do work around like, improving that to kind of better the impact you have on that community?
If there's someone in the crowd right now who's on the fence in terms of the impact of systemic racism in today's society, what would be a resource or two that you would encourage them to tap into?
Oh man, so many.
Besides the white folks hood book.
I think Ta-Nehisi Coates has amazing books. So like Between the World and Me, We Were 8 Years in Power. Everything Ta-Nehisi Coates writes around that is brilliant. Even going back to people like James Baldwin, who were talking about this stuff way back in the day. I think about Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks. Like if you talk about the intersectional experience of like black women in this intersectionality, there's an author named Kimberly Crenshaw who kind of talks about what intersectionality is. And so it's saying like if you have an oppressive factor of race, you have an oppressive factor of being a woman, right? Those oppressive factors kind of meet to be like kind of greater than the kind of sum of their parts. And so I think kind of that kind of education really does help you kind of see, like, and the disparities are like in the pudding, right? It's like we talk about, this like pull yourself up by the bootstraps thing, but there's so much knowledge around like bootstraps weren't available if you talk about slavery, then you talk about Jim Crow, then you talk about redlining, you talk about how African Americans were left largely out of the GI Bill. There's just so many things that kind of went into like, and these things are systemic. So it's not just like in the ways of thinking, it's also literally in the laws. So it's like a de jure and a de facto kind of oppressive situation. And so being able to be like, okay, this is real. Like there's so much data to support it's real. Now what are we gonna do? And there is something that can be done about it, but I have to do the work just like you have to do the work, and we all have to do the work. And even if you're a person of color, even if you're in the LGBTQ community, even if you're a woman, you can kind of internalize those sentiments too. A person of color can internalize anti-blackness, women can internalize kind of anti-woman sentiment, and so we all have to be doing this work, and there's lots of great readings out there to kind of do that kind of work.
Shifting gears for a second, Katelyn, we recognize the benefits in terms of exterior when it comes to young people in sports. Opportunity maybe to go to college for your performance, the prestige that comes with it in your community. It's like going, oh, you play on a team, da 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 da. what did you get out of playing sports mentally? I know you said that at one point you felt like you hated it, but there was also a point in which you loved it. What did you get from it mentally by the participation?
I think one, getting active, like even just walking, you can experience creativity more than when you're just sitting around. And so being in sport is like an escape from your family or your house or whatever you're going through. You just get into the gym and you start becoming active, and it's like everything falls into place from there. I think writing and journaling is a really good way to help mental health, but I think sports is really incredible too.
If there was an opportunity for you to go back in time and talk to your younger self about sports and about your mental health, what would you say to that younger version of yourself?
To speak up for myself, because I think something that, like, I created a lot of my mental health problems because I didn't speak up. I felt like I didn't have a voice, so a lot of that was stifled, and I didn't have a release or anyone to talk to about it. So I wish I would have learned to communicate better and even seek help earlier, because something I've realized is if you're not 100% into something you're doing, something will take you out, and I feel like my physical injuries were more of a mental burnout.
If there was one or two things you can tell these professionals in terms of what they can bring back and begin incorporating immediately to make things more easier, if you will, for student athletes in particular, what would be those one or two directives? And the same question will go to you as well.
I think being able to realize that we're all humans and we make mistakes, but being there to support one another is really big and crucial. So being there to talk to your, if you are in touch with student athletes, being able to talk to these athletes and build them up, even building up their character versus their athletic abilities. I think that's something that we get wrong a lot with athletics is, they're just an athlete, and then what? When we graduate, I think we get really confused, and that's a whole other cycle that we have to go through. So just putting the human first.
Yeah, I really like that answer about humanizing things. I think one of the first things we could do is work on humanizing ourselves. I think self-love is one of those things that we talk about, but it's not something that, I don't think the kind of American system is one that promotes self-love first, right? It's get this money, get your cars, and get a family and those types of things. But the notion of looking inward and kind of doing that self-work is important. And so it's just like that plane analogy. You have to put your mask on before you put the mask on anybody else. We all want to get out here and help and make and move, but we're not really taking care of ourselves in those ways. And sometimes taking care of ourselves is looking at ourselves and asking those hard questions around what do I bring to this thing that I say I want to do? What are my own biases? What are the things that get in the way of kind of making impact? So I think doing that self-work is really important. And so taking that to the young people that you work with is really important. And I think the humanizing, I really think, are you really humanizing this person that you're working with? Do you see them as a full human being who has emotions and feelings and a family and a people and a community and a culture? I think if you're going to work in particular communities, you should really connect with that community in a really sincere way, right? If you're working in urban communities, you need to be out in urban communities, supporting urban communities, putting your dollars in urban communities. It's not just I go to work with these kids and then I go home. You really do want to kind of connect with people as full human beings. And I think sparking critical conversations, I think one of the things that tells me that you respect my mind is when you have a conversation with me and we're passing around ideas. And so so often athletes are looked at as these Spartan kind of automaton, just bodies, but they're minds as well. And so if you can connect with these people's minds, if you can do that in a way that's really sincere, that shows that you value what they have to say and think, I think that will benefit them and you. And I think those types of things really do make the difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to point out real quick before we wrap up, I know the doctor seems as if he's a really kind of affable young man and very easily approachable. He's a killer, all right? Look at his shoes. He's trying to win this contest. He is not playing. He is not playing. Just want to point those out. I thought I was doing something. Then he walked in the room. I was like, here you go. Dr. Young.
I appreciate that.
Thank you very, very much for your time. Katelyn, thank you very much for your time. You're absolutely brilliant.